What if the most dangerous police dog in Texas, the one they called a monster, the one scheduled to be put down tomorrow, suddenly froze mid-attack in front of a quiet 9-year-old boy who wasn't even supposed to be there? One raised hand, one whispered word, and a broken hero remembered he was still allowed to be loved. This is the true story-inspired journey of Shadow and Jake. Stay until the end. You'll need a tissue, and you'll leave believing in second chances again. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Late August in Central Texas. Heat shimmered above the red dirt, cicadas screamed in the live oaks, and the air smelled of dry cedar and old leather. The ranch sat quiet under that white sun, fences bleached silver, barns leaning like tired men. In the far pen, behind triple-reinforced chain link, a black and tan German shepherd paced in slow, furious circles. 6 years old, 26 inches at the shoulder, 85 pounds of muscle and memory. A long, pale scar ran down his left ribs. The rusted tag on his collar still read K9 Shadow 117. Everyone just called him Fury now. He had put 3 handlers in the hospital. No one came within 10 feet anymore. Then the old Ford pickup rattled through the gate, dust cloud trailing like a tired ghost. David Miller stepped out first. 36, sun-hardened, short dark brown hair already touched with gray at the temples, 3-day stubble, red-black checkered shirt rolled to the elbows, faded jeans tucked into scuffed boots. His eyes carried the permanent squint of a man who had spent too many years looking for something he couldn't name. He reached back into the cab and lifted down his son. Jake was 9, small for his age, brown hair sticking out under an oversized gray hoodie that swallowed his hands. Freckles across his nose, quiet hazel eyes that saw more than he said. The 2 big cowboy boots flopped when he walked. He had not smiled much since the accident took their old dog 2 years ago. David rested a calloused hand on the boy's shoulder, voice low and careful. "Stay close, son. Some things here bite." Jake only nodded, eyes already drifting toward the far pen. Shadow had stopped pacing. He stood rigid, ears sharp forward, staring across 100 yards of baked earth straight at the child. The growling died in his throat. Dust settled. Even the cicadas seemed to hush. Jake looked back. No fear. Just recognition, the way a person sometimes knows another soul without words. Shadow's tail gave one slow, uncertain wag. Then another. Old Luke Harrison leaned on the fence rail, 62 years carved deep into his face, white stubble, dark brown Stetson pulled low. He pulled the wheat stalk from his mouth and whispered to no one in particular, "Well, I'll be damned." David felt it first in his chest, something between pride and dread. He had brought his boy to this broken place for steady work, not miracles. Yet there it was, the most dangerous dog in Texas, standing perfectly still, waiting as if the world had just tilted a fraction toward mercy. Jake took one small step forward. Shadow lowered his head, not in threat, but in something close to hope. And in that long, sun-bleached silence, something older than fear began to mend. Early morning, the kind when the sky is still, holds the color of old pewter, and the grass is wet with dew that smells like iron. The men had gathered in a loose half-circle around the training pen, coffee steam curling from tin mugs, boots scuffing red dirt. Marcus Grant, 48, broad as a barn door, salt and pepper crew cut, mirrored sunglasses hiding whatever he felt, stood with arms folded, thick leather gloves creaking. He believed in force the way some men believe in God. Inside the pen, Shadow moved like black fire, hackles raised, teeth flashing at every shadow that dared come close. The latch on the gate had been weak for weeks. No one had dared fix it. One hard shoulder from the dog, and the chain snapped. Metal sang, then silence, broken only by the sudden thunder of paws. He came straight across the yard, low and fast, aimed at the small figure leaning on the bottom rail, hoodie sleeves over his hands, boots too big for the stirrups of boyhood. Jake. David saw it first from the hayloft. The mug slipped from his fingers, coffee splashing dark across the boards. He ran, lungs burning, but the distance was cruel. Jake did not run. He simply lifted one small hand, palm forward, the way you quiet a frightened horse. His voice came out soft, almost a whisper against the morning. "Easy, boy. It's just me." Shadow hit the brakes so hard his claws carved furrows in the dirt. Dust rose and hung like smoke. 20 pounds of snarling fury became 20 pounds of trembling uncertainty. The growl caught in his throat and died. He stood there, chest heaving, eyes locked on the child. Then slowly, as if the weight of 2 lost years pressed on his neck, he lowered his head until his muzzle nearly touched the outstretched fingers. Jake stepped forward one careful step. His palm settled between Shadow's ears. The dog closed his eyes. A shudder ran through the big body, something between sob and surrender. The ranch hands stood frozen. Marcus's sunglasses reflected a man and a boy and a dog caught in a single breath of grace. Old Luke took the wheat stalk from his mouth and let it fall. David reached them, knees buckling. He wrapped Jake in his arms, felt the small heart racing against his own. Pride and terror braided so tight he could not tell them apart. He expected the boy to be shaking. Jake was not. He was listening to the dog breathe of the dog the way you listen to an old friend finally telling the truth. Shadow leaned, just a fraction, into the child's touch. The scar along his ribs caught the first gold of sunrise, turning silver to fire. In that hush, David understood something he would spend the rest of his days trying to deserve. His son had not tamed a monster. He had reminded a hero that he was still loved. And the morning, quiet and vast, held them all like a promise kept too long in the dark. Night rain, soft and steady, drumming on the tin roof of the bunkhouse like 1,000 quiet apologies. Inside the small office, lit only by a green banker's lamp, David sat alone with a thin manila folder. The paper smelled of old smoke and courthouse dust. Luke had left it on the desk without a word, just a nod that carried 20 years of regret. Luke Harrison, 62, face like cracked saddle leather, white stubble catching the lamplight, eyes the color of creek water after a storm. He had spoken that evening for the first time in months, voice low and gravel rough, telling the men around the fire what really happened 2 years ago in a rain-soaked apartment in Houston. Shadow, still young then, had torn a kidnapper off a 9-year-old girl. Gunshot, screams, blood on cheap carpet. The child lived. But when the medics pulled her away, she looked at the dog who saved her and shrieked in terror. Her parents blamed the vicious animal. Brass needed a scapegoat. Shadow's handler fought, lost, and drank himself quiet. The dog was labeled broken. Faith turned to fear in one heartbeat. David read the reports twice. His hands shook, not from anger, from recognition. He knew that particular kind of silence, the kind that settles in a house when love is present but never spoken. His own father had worn it like cologne. David had sworn his son would never breathe it. Yet now Jake laughed again, small, startled sounds when Shadow pressed close to the fence. Real laughter, the kind that used to spill out of the boy before a speeding truck took their old mutt and half of Jake's childhood with it. David closed the folder. Rain slid down the window in silver threads. He pictured keeping Jake away, safe, untouched. He pictured the boy growing quiet forever. Outside, lightning flickered. For one pale second, the yard lit up. Shadow sitting in the downpour, soaked black coat gleaming, eyes fixed on the bunkhouse window where a 9-year-old slept. Waiting. Patient as grief. David pressed his forehead to the cool glass and felt the old fear loosen its grip just a little. A father's job, he understood then, was not to build taller walls. It was to teach his child which doors were worth walking through. He left the folder on the desk, light still burning, rain still falling. Tomorrow he would not stop Jake from going to the pen. He would walk beside him. Some risks, he decided in the dark, are the only way to keep a heart alive. Mid-morning, sky the color of washed tin, air so still the dust hung like a held breath. Marcus Grant had decided the dog needed to be reminded who was boss. He entered the pen in full bite-sleeve gear, voice sharp as barbed wire, demanding sits and downs that Shadow had forgotten how to give. The big shepherd circled, ears flat, eyes wild with old ghosts. Marcus raised the baton, not to strike, only to command, and Shadow exploded. Teeth flashed. A snarl ripped the quiet in half. Marcus stumbled back, pride cracking louder than bone. Then a small voice cut through the storm. "Shadow, stop." Just that, soft as Sunday rain. Jake stood at the gate he had slipped through, hoodie sleeves over his fists, boots planted wide for balance. The boy walked forward, unafraid, until he could lay his palm against the dog's heaving side. Shadow's growl dissolved into a broken whine. He folded to the dirt, muzzle pressing hard into Jake's thigh, as if anchoring himself to the only safe place left on earth. Marcus stared, sunglasses finally coming off, revealing eyes suddenly older than his years. Hours later, 3 county evaluators arrived in pressed khakis and clipboards. They had come to sign the end. Shadow failed every test, lunged at the leash, snapped at the dummy, refused every command. The lead evaluator reached for the final form. Jake didn't ask permission. He simply ducked under the rail and crossed the arena alone. Sunlight caught the dust motes around them like slow gold snow. He placed both small hands on either side of Shadow's face. The dog's breathing steadied. Shoulders dropped. He sat. Perfectly. Still. Eyes soft for the first time in 2 years. One evaluator whispered, voice thick, "That's not obedience. That's trust." David stood beyond the fence, cap in his hands, tears tracking clean lines through the dust on his cheeks. He had come ready to fight the world to keep his son safe. Instead, he watched his boy save a life. The fear that had lived in his chest since Jake was born loosened, turned into something warmer. Pride, surrender, love without chains. The papers were folded away unsigned. Marcus cleared his throat, looked at the ground, then at Jake. "Kid, you just rewrote the rules." Shadow leaned into the boy's touch, scar catching the light like a healed river. And David understood. Some doors you don't lock. You walk through them together. Late September afternoon, the light turning honey thick, wind carrying the first cool promise of autumn across the open yard. The days had grown gentle. Jake's quiet voice, "Sit, stay, come," were answered with perfect grace. Shadow's tail, once rigid as a blade, now swept slow arcs in the dust whenever the boy appeared. The scar on his flank had faded to a pale ribbon. Men who once carried bite poles now carried coffee and watched in silence as a broken dog remembered how to be whole. Then the storm gate in the equipment shed rattled loose. A young stallion, wild-eyed and half-broke, exploded into the open, hooves drumming thunder, straight toward Jake, who stood frozen with a handful of wildflowers. No one was close enough. Shadow saw it first. He launched from the shade of the barn like black lightning, shoulder slamming the horse's chest just enough to twist its path. A hoof caught him hard across the ribs. He rolled, came up limping, blood bright on black fur, and planted himself between the boy and 2,000 pounds of panic. Teeth bared, not in rage, but a vow. The stallion veered, crashed into the corral panels, and was caught. Shadow never moved. He stood guard until Jake's small arms wrapped around his neck. The ranch hands wept openly, grown men with cracked hands and cracked hearts, tears cutting channels through the dust on their faces that hadn't cried in decades. David dropped to his knees in the dirt, gathered them both, boy and dog, into the circle of his arms, and felt something inside him finish healing. Marcus took off his hat, held it against his chest, and whispered, "Forgive me, old friend." 1 year later, under softer skies, Jake and Shadow walk into school gyms and children's wards. Jake, a little taller now, hoodie sleeves finely fitting, introduces them the same way every time. "This is Shadow. He once saved my life. Now he saves hearts." Shadow sits tall beside him, eyes shining black and tan coat, old scar barely visible, eyes bright with purpose. When a frightened child reaches out a trembling hand, Shadow lowers his great head and lets the touch land gentle as forgiveness. And somewhere in the back of every room, an old man with white stubble or a tired father in a checkered shirt wipes his eyes, remembering a dusty afternoon when a dog chose to love again. They had come to the ranch looking for second chances. They left carrying them out into the world, one quiet heartbeat at a time. Folks, if you're over 55 and watching this with a quiet house around you, maybe a few aches that weren't there yesterday, maybe nights that feel a little too long, remember Shadow. Some days the pain, the loneliness, the illness can make us feel like old dogs nobody wants anymore. But somewhere out there is a child's hand, a kind word, a reason to wag again. Reach out, call that friend, visit that neighbor, let somebody touch the scar. You are still somebody's hero. Healing isn't just for the young's privilege, it's God's promise to every weary heart. If this story moved you, share it, leave a comment, subscribe so we can keep telling these truths together. May the good Lord hold you close tonight, ease your pain, and send you your own Jake when you need him most. You're never too old to be loved back to life. God bless you, everyone.